Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terrence Allen. I am the Director, Education, Training and Assessment with Employ Prince George's. And I'll be introducing our panel for this session. Thank you for joining us for this session, which is going to examine how technology can alleviate access barriers to multilingual adult learners and workers. Our panelists this afternoon include our moderator, Dr. Katie Brown, founder and chief education officer at NGen, Molly Tidwell, program officer for community engagement for the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, Muriel Clausen, co-founder and CEO of Anthill, Nicole Pumphrey, senior managing director at Philadelphia Perscalis, and Dr. Vanessa Keetle, chief strategy officer at Student Ready Strategies. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the session.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Please come in, sit down. I see you back there by the door. You should all come in. It's going to be very exciting. My name's Katie, and I'm so excited to get to moderate this panel today, talking about one of my favorite things, which is increasing workforce participation for immigrants, refugees, and speakers of other languages. What's perhaps most exciting is that this is not the first time this has come up at the conference. We've been hearing over the last 2 days examples of innovative workforce programs that are including immigrants and refugees in their programming, community college programs that have planning for skilled immigrants and internationally trained professionals. But what we really want to talk about today, and the reason why I'm super excited about the collection of experts I have up here with me, is that even with this amazing programming that innovative and forward-thinking institutions are doing, we still have people who are falling through the cracks. So we have 2 million immigrants in the United States who are unemployed or underemployed because they can't use the skills and credentials they bring with them from their home countries or from the countries where they were before they came to the United States. We have 2 open roles right now for every job seeker. So the problem that we need to address is huge. There's an enormous amount of opportunity. And I think everybody up here is working on a different part of solving this problem. So our plan is to have a conversation. And also, we really would like this to be as interactive as is possible in a giant ballroom. So we're going to have time for questions, and we really hope that you ask questions. I actually didn't tell Kale ahead of time that we were going to do this, so I'm not sure if you guys need microphones or if someone needs to be in charge of getting a microphone to somebody who might want to ask a question, but about halfway through, that's the plan. So that is your official notice, if you're in charge, that we're going to have audience participation as part of our panel. A little bit about me. My PhD is in second language acquisition. I started my career as an adult educator teaching at a community college here in Maryland. I worked at the University of Maryland University College, which is what University of Maryland Global Campus was called before they changed their name. And after I spent about 10 years in higher ed doing research at the intersection of language learning and technology, I left to work in the private sector because I was tired of how slow higher ed is at getting anything done. So I've spent the past 12 years building technology that I've used with learners all over the world to get English skills, and the last 4 years focusing on helping immigrants, refugees, and speakers of other languages in the US get the English skills they need for jobs with the potential for economic mobility. And I'm going to let the rest of my panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll get started.
Hi, everybody. My name's Molly Tidwell, and I'm a program officer at Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, which is headquartered right down the street here in Baltimore. LIRS is one of 10 national refugee resettlement agencies. And so we work across the country in over 55 cities, resettling new Americans and supporting their integration. In our 85-year history, we've resettled 750,000 refugees across that network. And we talk a lot at LIRS about an empowered living model. And I've been so encouraged today to hear so many of you share about opportunities for training, education, and advancement opportunities, and trying to recruit from a diverse talent pool. And that is such a key part of our work, is developing partnerships with other organizations across the country. And so An empowered living model is working toward not just getting new Americans resettled in the traditional sense of getting their first job, having their children enrolled in schools and other essentials that are part of that early transition, but also helping to support them getting access to mental health services, helping them to get small business loans to start a business or purchase a car. Helping them to, truly have the opportunities to return to their career of choice or get training for a career that they want to be in. And so my role at LARS is developing employer partnerships across the country. Last year, we launched an initiative called Preferred Refugee Employers that seeks to formalize partnerships with businesses who recognize the value of refugee talent and want to work with us to learn to become, better at providing a welcoming and inclusive workplace. And so as part of that initiative, companies provide at least 5 of the best practices that we recommend, which are things like vocational mentorship or a refugee-focused recruiting process, but also essential things like housing subsidies, childcare support, and other essential things like English language learning. So the companies that work with us to hire refugee talent and create that inclusive environment reap the benefits of a really talented workforce and an economy powered by hardworking, dedicated employees. Refugee employees, as I'm sure many of you know, bring a depth of experience in education. They range across so many different sectors and industries of importance in our economy. They also have higher retention rates than other employees and bring outstanding work ethic to the job. So at a time when we face unprecedented labor shortages and workforce challenges, immigrants and refugees are uniquely positioned to help lessen that strain on our workforce and economy. So I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about how partnership and collaboration across refugee and immigrant communities, businesses, nonprofits, and also institutions of education are able to come together to support building more inclusive pathways for multilingual learners and unlocking that massive talent pool that they represent. Thank you.
Nikki.
Hey, everyone. My name is Nikki Pumphrey. I'm the Senior Managing Director of Perscolis in Philadelphia. I am thrilled to be here because I want to share more about what Perscolis is doing to help connect folks who have traditionally been underrepresented in the technology sector to thriving wage careers in the industry. Perscolis has been open in Philadelphia since 2019, but we are a national nonprofit who has been doing this work since 1995 when we opened our doors in the Bronx. Since then, we've connected 20,000 people to careers in technology. Wow, I heard that too.
Wow.
What I am most excited about for this discussion today, though, is the marriage of the work that I used to do and still do. So for many, many years, I worked for an organization called the Welcoming Center in Philadelphia, the Philly crew. That was really at the fore of thinking through immigrant integration, especially for foreign trade professionals. We spent a lot of time advocating for immigrants to be included in the workforce discussion, whether it be adult education or whether it be, sort of economic mobility. What I have found and what I really want to be able to share today is that at Perscolis, that work is still happening, and we are really still seeing that work happen, so much so that probably a large portion, almost 50% of our learners that we see in Philadelphia at Perscolis are multilingual learners that are coming from other countries. And even though, we don't specifically name immigrants, refugees, and multilingual learners as a target population, they are. And so the work that we do, the work that we do with employers, the work and the ways in which our programs are responsive and the employers that we work with are providing inclusive and diverse workplaces. Those are the things that are truly benefiting immigrants, refugees, and multilanguage learners. So I'm excited to share with you what that experience has been like, and talk a little bit about our work in the tech sector and technology as an industry and a tool.
Hello, everybody. My name is Vanessa Cadle, and I serve as the Chief Strategy Officer at Student Ready Strategies. Things that I am not: an expert in technology. I am not an expert in the workforce. However, I am here on this panel to discuss post-secondary education and the ESL programs that some of you may work in. I'm just going to get a pulse on the room. Do we have any folks in this room who are working in ESL, ELL programs right now? Raise your hand. Awesome. That's amazing. I'm so glad you're here. Over the last year, I have been working, doing very deep work to write a white paper with my colleagues at WestEd on multilingual learners of English and their post-secondary pathways. I think that's extremely important for this audience and this connection to pathways, getting them into the workforce, for us to understand where we as higher education professionals can change what we are doing and think about the barriers that we might be creating for these students, and understanding that a little bit more so you can go back to your own institutions and think about how you can leverage technology. You can leverage knowing more about your multilingual learner students, and helping them get into the workforce. And at Student Ready Strategies, we provide technical assistance. And one of the things that we did a while ago was create curricular maps related to developmental education reform. These curricular maps had developmental courses. They had courses that might be foundations that could be giving students credit. And then they would go and take gateway courses or co-requisite courses, right? And so we were making these maps showing the progression of students. They looked like spaghetti, and they really helped leverage conversations around creating change for student pathways to gateway courses in math and English. So the first courses that they were taking, right? Some of the data that we received from the states that we were working with included their ESL courses or their ESOL courses, depending on where we were. And so we mapped those. My colleague Sarah and I spent a long time looking at those courses and thinking about, wow, these don't connect to anything. We heard stories about students who were taking 154 credits. They had 154 credits this one student had, but they were all ESL credit, and she was nowhere near graduating with any type of credential, degree, anything. And so that is why we are extraordinarily passionate about this work, and thinking about how we can change these pathways and create smooth, clear transitions for these students. And I'm excited to add that my perspective, and hopefully the post-secondary perspective to this conversation today.
Wonderful. And I'm Muriel Clausen-Kloss, co-founder and CEO of Antil. In a prior life, I was in academia doing research at the intersection of the frontline workforce and artificial intelligence, specifically looking at how we can develop tools that remove systemic barriers that exist for too many folks who are trying to build career pathways for themselves. Through that work, we developed Antil. Antil is a virtual assistant for workforce program leaders, basically to scale the impact that those programs can have. We have a technology experience that essentially helps create a more inclusive experience for non-English speakers, folks who have faced educational trauma, and other groups who face systemic barriers in their career access. It's been a lot of fun to do this work because we work with a lot of workforce leaders who, when we meet them, have less than a 20% yield rate with non-English speaking populations in their programs. And then after working together, over 97% of folks that they're trying to reach engage with the program and stick with it over a year later. So we are really focused on, and I'm very passionate about, how do we take these great programs that we invest so much energy in and actually make them work for the populations that we're trying to reach. Very excited for the conversation that we're about to have.
Thank you. And so now everyone here can be just as excited as I am to have this diverse group of experts ready to tackle the questions. which my first question is like really big picture. What are the benefits of investing in a multilingual workforce? Just to make sure everyone is on the same page about why we should do this. And I'm going to get Molly to start.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is the economic benefits of refugees and immigrants in the US. Immigrants make up 13.6 of the general population, but they are over 17% of the workforce. So they're more likely to be working age than their US born counterparts. So they're more likely to be active in the labor force, allowing them to contribute, not just with their as consumers, but also as taxpayers. A couple of numbers for you. Immigrants earn $1.7 trillion in household income. They have $1.3 trillion in spending power and pay $467.5 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. So the growth in the immigrant population has helped to strengthen America's labor force significantly. And as baby boomers retire, younger immigrants are filling crucial work gaps. Nationally, immigrants they're more likely to hold an advanced degree. They're also less likely to have a high school education, key factors that make them able to fill critical workforce gaps across both high and low skill roles.
Thank you. Muriel, do you have anything you want to add to this question?
Yeah, I love to come at this from the employer angle because I think the folks in this room are all early adopters of these ideas. I think we all get that this is a huge area of opportunity. My favorite thing that I've seen over the last couple of years is that employers are starting to get it too. The not early adopters. And the reason they're starting to get it is because there is a math problem in this country. If you look at the total number of jobs right now, Katie already mentioned it, that employers are trying to fill with a frontline worker, there's 0.52 people for each of those jobs right now in the United States. And I talk to a lot of employers and they go, oh, please tell me this was just a pandemic era problem. Please tell me that this is all about to go away. And the answer is no, it's not. It's actually going to get much greater. The latest Bureau of Labor Statistics data, it was actually recently published, hot off the presses. If you look at number of jobs we're projected to create in this nation by 2030, which is about 12 million, 11.9, and you look at folks who will retire during that time and folks who will enter the labor force during that time, we're going to end up with about 1.4 million new people for those 12 million new jobs. So if we do the math and we extrapolate out from where we are today, employers are going to have one person for every 8 jobs they want to fill. And do you know what I say to that? Awesome. Because we're going to have to get really creative about how we reach populations that aren't participating in our labor force today. One of the populations I think that we should all be excited about is our immigrant and non-English speaking population. They are going to fill these new jobs that are created. And so are we organizations that can employ these individuals? Are we institutions that are positioned to educate these individuals? Are our organizations making investments in this community? Because there will be winners and losers in the war for talent. And we have to start investing here now. So my favorite thing is these employers that aren't trying to do anything altruistic at all are just facing this math problem that we're all facing, and they have to care right now, whether they're a good person or not. And I love when supply and demand curves shift and really good things for society happen. So I think it's a very exciting time.
It is a very exciting time. And a few of you were at the workshop I gave yesterday where I pointed out that the United States is a hopelessly monolingual country. We are a country where everyone took language class in middle school and high school and no one can say anything. And everyone's sort of chuckling, but this is really embarrassing and we should not be proud of it because it's caused 2 massive problems. One is that everyone in the United States thinks that language class is a place you go where you don't learn anything, which is horrible. And it also means we don't as a country appreciate multilingualism. When you are someone who looks like me, y empiezo a hablar en español, todo el mundo está, mira que ella habla español muy bien, qué bien. But if I were sitting up here and I were speaking English to you in an accent, you would all be looking at me and not thinking the same thing. And that's what we do in the United States. And it is terrible. And when we're talking about immigrant and refugee talent, we're talking about people who already speak at least one other language fluently, which we don't have. And we need it if we want to compete on a global scale. We need to have our workforces reflect the people who are engaging with them. We need healthcare practitioners to speak the language of the people they're taking care about. We need teachers and early childhood educators to be able to speak the language of the children they're caring for. And we can do that, like right now, way faster than the last 50 years of Americans trying to learn Spanish, by helping our immigrants and refugees get English skills. And so we need to shift as a country to thinking about this from an asset-based perspective instead of a deficit perspective. The US meets the needs of 4% of our adult English learners. Institutions of higher education have been failing them since they started serving them. And we have to stop, because if we keep doing the same thing we've always done, we are going to work around institutions of higher education and find alternative ways, leveraging technology to help immigrants and refugees get the skills they need to participate in the workforce. Because as Muriel said, we need like more people than we can imagine to fill the jobs that we have coming. However, when we are bringing newcomers to the United States, they often face challenges. And I think in addition to thinking about the benefits we bring to the workforce, it's important to acknowledge the challenges that newcomers face when they first try to get jobs. So when we're thinking about the refugee perspective, then I'm going to ask Molly to answer this question again. What are some of the challenges that refugees face?
Yeah, I love the tone of this panel because it's very excited and hopeful. But we do, know that newcomers are going to experience barriers to the workforce. And that could be something as simple as, the job is not on the bus line and they don't have a car. That could also, as in the case of language acquisition, as Katie mentioned, so often in a refugee case particularly, as they arrive, they're going to be enrolled in English language classes. But as soon as they get that first job, which is, a requirement of our federal funding for these programs, as soon as they get that job, they're likely not going to be able to attend that 10 a.m. Language class. And so we see people get kind of boxed into entry-level jobs because they can't improve their English skills. And because of the way our workforce is set up, they're not going to be able to advance in their career. Additionally, some of the same issues that all Americans face are going to also be even more challenging for newcomers. So things like, lack of access to quality childcare, sustainable housing, lack of digital literacy are some of the barriers that they'll experience.
And Nikki, have you seen technology be used to remove some of these barriers?
Yeah. I love this question. So technology is a tool, right? We think about it often as like being a key to unlock something for someone, with someone. What has been really interesting is also thinking about technology as like a level playing field, especially when we think about an industry. So how many of the roles that exist today, there's a larger future of work conversation here, but how many roles that exist today will be enhanced or enabled through technology? And how many roles today will then be those roles that are helping to make sure that technology runs smoothly for other positions that were formerly, someone working, right? What is so fascinating, especially at an organization like Perscolis, is we are seeing the technology industry as one, as Muriel said, have such a great need for a future workforce, right? And so in places like Philadelphia, where 1 in 5 people in the workforce are foreign born, the ability to tap into this workforce is absolutely critical. The other thing that I'll say about technology as an industry is when we talk about access to short-term skilling, when we talk about stackable credentials that are valued by employers, when we talk about access to quickly moving into thriving wage careers, we're talking about technology. For organizations like Perscolis, we are seeing employers who are making sure that the jobs that they're offering are being accessible to more and more individuals. And I think immigrants and refugees are included in this because there is a value being put on the demonstration of skills through things like credentials. The ability to, I think, level the playing field and have folks be able to demonstrate, in addition to so many of the other skills, experiences, and capabilities that folks have and bring when they come to this country, but to be able to demonstrate those tangible skills. I think technology as an industry is unrivaled at that. And I think we're going to see that continue for a long time.
Vanessa, do you want to jump in here?
I think, well, one thing I was thinking about was, I think it was the first morning keynote, and he was talking about the idea of skills transcripts for students, right? And how I'm thinking about being innovative at our institutions and how are we documenting what our students are doing related to those skills, so that they can take that into the workforce. And I think there is technology that could be built or maybe is out there that is doing that. I think there are some institutions who are already doing that. They've already thought about it. And I think that's a good way to leverage it. I do think that we have to think about technology that we are using as higher education professionals, as not just what our students are using or what those entering the workforce are using, but what do we use in our classrooms to make it easier for our students? How are we supporting them? So I think technology plays a huge role in that. And the digital literacy piece, if we are helping our students while they're in our classrooms to do those things, they're going to be even more equipped once they get into the workforce to have that digital literacy that they need.
I think that makes sense. Muriel, you were nodding. Did you want to add anything?
I'll always add something. I think, technology, I think is like a really interesting tool to solve real problems. And I think it's just that. I think that right now we just all have like a new tool in this last year because of some of the advances in generative AI. We just do. It's really not that cool in its own right. It's only cool if we use it to solve sticky challenges. And we all have them. Like, for example, it is really tough if you have an only English speaking warehouse to employ someone who speaks Farsi. Yeah, fair. Well, actually, that doesn't have to be true anymore. With advances with Gen AI, our platform, we translate over 75 languages, and there's lots of other solutions like that. So some of these things that we think, oh, well, this isn't possible for us because of X, that might not be true anymore thanks to technology. And that's the only reason I ever get excited about technology is what's the real problem that we're trying to solve that we think is a barrier to us even trying this. I bet a lot of those, if you really scope them out, could be removed with some of the advances that we've seen recently.
Yes, I love that. And I love your point about what is the real problem we're trying to solve. Whenever I give a talk or moderate a panel about technology, I think it's worth pointing out that technology for the sake of technology does nothing but cause problems. And technology should be used to solve specific problems. And in the case right now of connecting the dots, it's making sure that you're reaching all of the constituents that you want to be able to reach because you're using technology they already have. You're not making people download something new that they've never seen before. You're letting them use whatever it is they're using to communicate, to participate in your online class, or to find out about the job that you have posted. You're translating things or letting people use tools that will translate things for them. You're letting them use generative AI to write cover letters. There was a study that came out recently looking at cover letters written by English learners using generative AI compared to the cover letters that they wrote without it. When they sent the cover letters that ChatGPT helped them write, they were like 50% more likely to get a job interview because we have a huge bias about English being perfect. So just understanding those things and helping people leverage the technology that exists is super, super important. Vanessa, when we think about post-secondary education, meeting the needs of multilingual learners, and I know that you have a lot to say about this, and everybody here should read it in the wonderful white paper. But if you were going to say something high level about how post-secondary institutions fit into this ecosystem-wide problem of ensuring that we have multilingual learners and workers, what would you say?
Ooh,
I have so many things to say. I will say that first. The way the question was framed first was, is post-secondary education meeting the needs of multilingual learners? And my response was going to be no, and then just pass the mic. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm going to read two statistics to you from our report, and then talk a little bit after that. So there was a study that was done on Latino ESL students in community colleges. And in that study, they looked at who was, advancing through their ESL courses and their success rates and things like that. One I want to pull out for you to think about is 55% of those students did not advance beyond their first ESL course. Okay, I'll leave you there. And then when we're thinking about gateway English courses, getting these students into credit-bearing, pathway-aligned, program-aligned courses, we all know they need an English 101 type of course, right? Only 34% of degree-seeking ESL students pass college-level English in 6 years. Okay. So right there demonstrates the severity of the problem that we're facing. This is something we talked a lot about when we were looking at developmental education. And this is really really impacting our adult students, right? These are folks that are coming back and saying, I want to get more education because I want to be in the workforce. I want a better job. And so those statistics really communicate where there are barriers, some of the barriers, right? Other places that we found to be very problematic, there is a lack of data that tracks students from K-12 into post-secondary. So tracking, not a great word in education, but we can't follow those students. We don't know what is happening. We don't know how many are in our high schools and are, might be in their ESL courses and, they're graduating high school and they're coming into post-secondary and that flag is on their transcript from high school and they have to take a placement test. They still are being placed into ESL courses, which we have seen to be a gauntlet for them, right? We don't have enough information and data infrastructure that is aligned across our education systems in our states to deeply understand the problem that we're facing, but we know that it's significant. There is a lack of federal and state policy related to multilingual learners, particularly when it comes to just understanding and helping them get through pathways. There's a lot around workforce, right? There's a lot around adult education. So right at the beginning, but there isn't anything in our states that isn't related to developmental education. And a lot of those policies actually exempt students that are ESL or MLE students. And we see that there is such a disconnect between our adult education courses going into continuing education courses and even through the academic pathways. These pathways aren't connected. So think about your own institutions and where all of these different courses lie. Are they talking to each other? Do the staff even know each other? Adult education courses are often not at our institutions. So how do you learn more about those and get them connected? And I think one thing that I will say, and I really encourage you all to think about, is communication to these students to be able to get them into these programs so that they can join the workforce. And technology, thinking about your websites. How are they communicating to these students? If you go to your website and you look around ESL courses or testing for these students, what type of language is it using? Is it jargony? Is it easily translated to any other language? Can we use AI for that to do that more easily? But right now, our university and college websites are not doing a great job of welcoming students, particularly those who are non-native English speakers, but also for our English speaking students, to be honest with you. So that is something that we all should go back or right now, pull it up on your phone, take a look and see what that looks like for your students. So even the emails that you're sending, the billboards, how are you communicating to students? students. So those are some barriers that we're finding, not all technology related, but again, could be technology solution in there to solve some of that. So we need to recognize these barriers and recognize that we're not doing the greatest job with these students. There is pockets of innovation, though. I will say that there are great programs out there. But we need to think about how we can systematize and scale those great programs and understand what each part of those programs are and how they are affecting our MLE students. All the students that we talk to for this paper and that we are talking to on a regular basis, and probably all of you in the workforce piece that work with these refugees, immigrants, MLEs every day, it's really about people. They want to be connected to people. That is what's helping them get through our courses. It's that sense of belonging, just like all the research that we already know. And so how we can even use technology to leverage some of that belonging. So I do want to point that out. That's another finding that we had, is that connection to you all in this room. That's important to these students.
And to add to that, I've learned a lot of new initiatives and workforce development opportunities even today that I think they're not necessarily being marketed to all of these underrepresented groups. So, the resettlement network is across the US, likely in every city where your institutions are. And are you providing information, flyers to them to share with the populations that they're supporting? Because can assure you that there's a lot of untapped applications out there.
There are a lot of untapped applications, and there are also a lot of applicants who come to institutions of higher education and are not being welcomed. I'm sort of echoing what Vanessa says here, but thinking about offering credit for prior learning, helping with transcript evaluation. If I had $1 for every immigrant who told me they needed to get a GED after they went to their local community college, or who has a bachelor's degree and is told none of your credits count. And I'm like, your credits are done. You have a degree from your country. You need to get your degree, you need the equivalent maybe, but forward-thinking institutions across the country are thinking about how to be more flexible with giving people with foreign credentials and foreign training credit for what they've done. And if any conference is the conference to talk about it, it's CALE. But we're not always including our foreign trained students, and we need to do a better job. I don't know if anybody wants to weigh in on that.
I will just piggyback. I think it's something that we really thought about when we were diving into this work. First of all, everybody told us that it was too much. You're never going to connect these pathways in post-secondary. Don't tackle this problem. So we're still in the midst of it. And I'm very excited to tackle a very wicked problem. But think about, and we just talked about this, how many of you tested out of a language when you got to college, or offers you some form of credit because you were able to take a test in Spanish and they were like, you can speak Spanish. Here's 9 credits if you pay for them, right? And we value this. We value that a student can come in and do the same thing with French. We're giving them, you can get a full degree in French or any language, right? But
we don't do it with ESL.
But we do not do it with these students.
We take
right?
these students, many of them who have degrees from their home countries, and we say, before you can take a class that might help you re-credential here, you need to pay us to take 12 semesters of ESL, where you're going to learn to write great paragraphs. And we wonder why they're not enrolling in our institutions of higher education.
And I will say that is where organizations that offer short-term credentials come in,
Yes.
right? And so it's a very quick, easy pathway to get into a career where you can easily demonstrate other skills that you have, even if language is still something that you're working on, right? So that's where organizations like Schools come in, but I do think it's critically important for that pathway not to end, right? So we need to think more
Yes.
about how organizations like our organizations are helping people continue along that learning pathway so that perhaps they're getting, into a career within 12 or 15 weeks, but that they're not stopping that journey of lifelong learning, and that they're then connecting to institutions that say, oh, perhaps we could give you credit for this credential that you have, or for this experience that you have, because it's super valuable. And you've already demonstrated that you can work in an environment where you are using English as the primary language.
I have more questions for my panelists, but I want to see if we have any in the audience. Does anyone have a question?
Mhm.
Yes.
Always heard from my education providers, exactly what you said, that they have to go through, either they have to go through a GED program. That either they have to go through a GED program, or they need to go through an excessive amount of ESL classes. And it's always perplexed me, and when you said it, why, and when an educational provider tells a workforce person that, is there something in the system that's telling them that? Because across 3 states, I've heard that replicated. So someone had to tell someone at some point in time, because 3 different states, 3 different educational groups all have told me in various stages the same thing. And, Kate, of course, I'm hearing something new, but when I go back to my area and somebody tells me that, what should be my response?
Why?
Mhm.
Ask them why. Ask them why somebody needs to go through however many semesters of ESL or has to take a GED, because they often can't tell you why. They're just going to say, well, that's just what we do. And then you can say, well, what if they can demonstrate competency in English some other way? What if we could offer wraparound services? But you have to, people have been teaching language in the United States the same way for like 200 years. And as we've all established, it does not work. So when they're telling you that you need to do it the same way they've done it for 200 years and it hasn't worked, you have to ask them why, and then you need to propose an alternative, because there are programs across the country, programs for highly trained, internationally trained professionals that rapidly get them job skills that don't make them jump through these hoops, but they are the exception, not the rule. So you just have to ask why.
And I don't work with NGen, so I'll say it. NGen is one of those partners. There are alternatives to the folks you're talking to.
And I would say we could go dive down a whole class on the history of higher education and who it was built for and when things like ESL courses, developmental education, all of these courses came into play, right? And it's a history that is steeped in marginalization. I messed up that word, marginalization, and centering white folks in that system and white English speaking folks. And so we also have to think about that and from a DEI perspective and how we're approaching that at the institution. So I love the idea of you and your role pushing back on that system. And I would appreciate that.
Because part of what we need, not just the challenge, but what are the actual exemplars that we can point to that says, this has been done, nothing blew up, and we actually got some folks through post-secondary education and into jobs. I know these examples exist from years ago, just in some of my work. You have examples of union-focused custodial services programs or facility management programs that are engaging we call them English language learners. I'm going to have to adjust to this MLL designation, but engage them in the work and then had the technology through their cell phones, where while they were working, they were listening to the English, they were learning the English words while they were on the job. Another example is in post-secondary education, where the Milwaukee Technical Community College took a bunch of foreignly educated health professionals who wanted to get back into that arena and put them in a dental technician program because they needed those skills and in their region, and an intensive ESL program. So they didn't wait till you learned the English first and then you could go. So because they had the high level skills already from their home country, they could handle the intensive English language courses. And I imagine the technology makes that even more easy in this day and age. So we need those examples. And if you, and maybe you have them on your websites but where are they collected, and pointing us to those. And then I would also ask the question about policy, which we haven't talked about on the panel thus far. But that ties back to Walter's question, because there are some real policy barriers across states and federally that need to be addressed. Why can't a certification in nursing from England or Spain or whatever be accepted if you can demonstrate competencies? How do you do that process? It's very complicated and convoluted. And so some policy change needs to happen as well to get people back into the workforce.
100%. So that there are many examples like the one that you just mentioned of integrated English instruction with job training happening honestly at employers. Over the last few years, I've seen more and more employers investing in this type of English upskilling because they're finding that they have an untapped talent pool with their incumbent workers. Maine Health is the largest employer in the state of Maine, and they have a robust program to take environmental facilities workers who don't speak English at all, get them English upskilling while they're working in environmental services, and they get them into apprenticeship programs that are funded through state and federal funding to first start out as patient care advocates and then become medical assistants. And I've seen employers building programs like this because they see that integrated English instruction works more quickly. So having those examples to use to push back when your local provider is telling you, I can't help this job seeker until they take 14 years of ESL is useful. And we are happy to send examples of this out afterwards. I don't know if anybody else up here wants to
Well,
jump in.
and just another angle for the policy piece, because sometimes policy actually follows what's happening in business. And I think this is a good opportunity for that. If employers remove degree requirements, it doesn't matter if we respect a degree from another country in our policy or not, because that person is employable at that employer, and that is the goal. So I think there's a real role here for business leaders to set the standard of what we want that policy to be and make sure it's in line with the just realities of what we need from our labor force.
And I think we need to think about institutional policy as well. So the policies at your institutions, what is on the books at your institution that needs to be revised, removed? What can be done within the bounds of a state or federal policy? There is a lot that you wouldn't think about. So I encourage you to dive into those handbooks as well and review your policies.
Okay, I will get my question. I'm Ashley Putnam from the Philly Fed. And first of all, I love the energy of this conversation. This is very exciting and also giving me a lot of hope and some real solid examples. And some of the work we've been doing recently, we've been talking to anchor institutions, so eds and meds, hospitals, universities, about hiring challenges. And we're hearing increasingly, not just in cities, right, but like in rural parts of the country, that the diversifying population is not being served by a lot of the healthcare institutions. And what I'm hearing from this is like, there is just so much talent that is not being tapped into. And I'm curious about, have you seen some of these examples of maybe partnerships between higher ed and healthcare? So the main example you just gave, where we're actually creating that kind of a bridge and pathway. Particularly, I mean, we're hearing this like Atlantic County that has an increasingly large refugee population, and they're going. We have again incredible tight labor market, can't get people in the door, and yet they're not tapping into this population because of a lot of the problems that you're lifting up here.
Yeah. Can I jump in? I love this point. We get to work with a lot of folks in rural America right now, and we have a group of 40,000 folks that are a part of a study that we're doing. And when we talk to those workers or those learners and ask them, why are you not able to complete your program or get employment? The reasons are what you pointed out. There's these barriers that make it extraordinarily hard to participate in our programs. You can't worry about learning English if you don't know if you have childcare. You can't worry about learning English if you don't have health care for a pre-existing condition you have. There are real barriers these folks face. So in light of that, if your goal is to lead an initiative to reach these folks and for these folks, our first and most important task is getting rid of every low-hanging fruit barrier that they face. Every single thing that could make it easier for them, do those things first. So that means, Katie brought it up earlier, this population largely does not have smartphones. And if they do have smartphones, they probably don't pay for data plans. So are we able to have them learn about our programs via text message? That's an easy first step. If you have questions on how to do that, talk to me. That's one right there. We just made it a lot easier just with that tip to get folks engaged with your program. Additionally, are we translating? We've talked about it a lot. I think people get very excited about the option for folks to learn English, and I do too. And I think that's a critical step. But what's the step before? Are we meeting people where they are so they can go on that journey? Additionally, even if someone is on that journey and is starting to learn English, their preferred language is still going to be their first language. So when we're having career development conversations, or we're asking them to do something complex like understand eligibility and payment, Are we letting them do that in their preferred language? There's a lot of these things that we can start to pick away at that aren't going to solve all the barriers someone faces, but it makes it a little less hard. And that is what this population is crying out for. That is what every conversation we have is centered on with these folks.
Yes.
I
Whoever
just
has a
want-
microphone can ask the questions because Laura's out there taking it around. So if she brings it to you, you can ask her question.
Well, I just wanted to say, when you're pushing back, one of the big things to explain is they're not going through a 2 or 4 year degree necessarily. So get them started in their pathway to learning. We just went through placement reform for many of the same things that you're talking about here in Minnesota. And the assumption when we started was that everyone needed to be ready to go do a 2 or 4 year liberal arts degree. And if you're in workforce, they're probably going for a lower level degree to start. Let's get them in. Let's, maybe get them more English down the road, but get them English to be functional, and then get them into the courses that are going to help them make more money. And then we can bring them back. And if they wanted to go farther, that's when we can do it. That's where that pushback needs to go, is why are you making them be prepared to go into a 4 year college degree when that's probably not what they're looking for immediately?
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Thank you. I have 2 quick questions. One, we have in Alaska, we have a lot of Ukrainian immigrants, and there's doctors and bookkeepers and, all kinds of professionals among them. And I'm wondering, so that we don't have to start from scratch, is there some kind of AI or some kind of a software that we can tap into, hopefully that won't cost a lot of money for our nonprofit, but that we can tap into to help them get that, and a lot of them have been exposed to English somewhere else, but not well enough to use their profession and get a job as a doctor. I mean, I know there's also licensing and all that stuff, but they could get a better job and be moving up while they're getting all those licenses. So I don't know where to find that, but I would certainly like to, so we don't have to start from scratch and do it ourselves, which I'm sure we wouldn't have to. And secondly, is the white paper available for us? Do I have to give you my card so that you'll send it to me?
We'll make sure it gets sent out or attached to the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
And I'd love to talk to you for 2 reasons. One, there's definitely a yes to your question in terms of software. It's just what type of problem are you trying to solve for? And if we pinpoint that, I'm happy to direct you where there's solutions. And second, I grew up in Alaska and I love running into Alaskans.
Love that. I'll just add one other thing. So, especially to the policy question, sir, thank you. And then also around this idea of skilled immigrant integration. So World Education Services has an incredible program called the Skilled Immigrant Integration Project. It's really looking at cities and states that are intentionally trying to include immigrants in workforce development. I would highly encourage you to check out the work that they're doing. And if that feels like a good initiative for your state or your city, to apply to be part of a cohort that is getting technical assistance from other states, cities, and organizations that are doing that work. For example, the Welcome Back Initiative is actually in Alaska doing that work to connect foreign trained doctors and nurses to other professions that can leverage their past experience and skills. I would also say that as part of SIP and part of that work, I have seen really incredible work, especially in Michigan, anybody from Michigan, about how to leverage WIOA dollars and how to think specifically about using WIOA dollars for immigrant integration and to bypass that need. And I think often some of that comes from just a lack of knowledge about what additional resources or programs exist that don't put English as a first or as a barrier to other forms of skilling or integration. Michigan is doing it really well. And so we could chat afterwards, sir.
So I had asked all my panelists to have a story to tell at the end that sort of explains a success story of how they've seen this work. Like, how have we connected the dots for an incumbent worker or a job seeker? We have a very limited amount of time. So I'm going to present them each with an option, which is either to tell your story in 1 minute or less, or leave the room with something that they can take away from this panel conversation that you want them to go back and do afterwards. Because I don't know how short your stories are. Muriel, you can go first.
This isn't the story I was going to tell, but it's the one I want to tell based on the questions we just had. Our head of cybersecurity at our company is an immigrant who came to this country in the lottery system, successfully found a cybersecurity training program, worked his way up to get a master's degree. And I met him when he was my Lyft driver, taking me to the airport a couple of years ago. And in the Lyft drive, he was really honestly just like beside himself, talking about how hard he worked to get where he was, and that no one is giving him a shot at a first job because he doesn't have any work experience in this country beyond jobs like Lyft, right? There is an ecosystem challenge here because there are employers that want to employ him. I mean, how many of you have heard over and over again how bad every company needs cybersecurity professionals, right? And this is someone that actually did make it through those programs, and it's still that hard. So now he's our head of cybersecurity, which is cool, and he's awesome, and he's incredible at what he does, and he lets me tell this story. But I just think like we have to ask ourselves, whatever seat we sit in, if you're a business, if you're a technology provider, if you're an educational institution, if you're an economic developer, like make sure we're talking to each other because we're all running different initiatives and programs, and we have to make sure that those are successful at actually real jobs for real people. And I think that only happens when we work together.
I won't tell you a story. I'll leave you with a parting word. I think it would be phenomenal if all of you go back to your institutions and you look at your websites. Look at your websites and how those are working for all of your students, but most importantly, these students that are multilingual learners, and see if they could understand what is on that website. And then secondly, get together with your colleagues and start to really think about how we are helping these students on their pathway. And then maybe next year when we come to Kale, you can share your stories about how your efforts change the lives of the students at your campus.
We were going to answer a question about how would we talk about a good employer. I really wanted to make this point, and it's part of my story, that good is really a spectrum, right? It's a spectrum of investment and intentionality. So it's going from awareness to accountability, or from, I think, accommodation to investment. And so when we think about employers, thinking about the upgrading of intentionality, and I think starting where you are. So I wanted to tell you about Dee, who came through Perscolas Philadelphia, was an IT professional in his home country and couldn't get a job, worked with Perscolas to get that industry recognized credential, and then went to work for an employer, Mastery Charter Schools in Philadelphia. They are a good employer for us because they are leveraging what naturally happens in their workforce. They are across the city. They see students and learners from multilingual families, immigrants and refugees across the city. And then therefore, they're being so intentional about welcoming in folks like Dee, who represent and are supporting the technology in their school, but who can connect with learners and other staff members because they're from that community. And to us, that's a good employer. And I would say on the other end of the spectrum, Perscolas has done a whole lot of work, but there are other organizations that are doing incredible work, like the West Philly Skills Initiative in Philly, that are working with employers to intentionally build pipelines, training programs that then ensure employment. And I think that is really, I think the height of where we want to see employers get to, that intentionality and then investment. And it looks like internal upskilling, but it also looks like intentionally building a pipeline that is inclusive, that is diverse, that then builds an environment that is truly where people feel like they belong.
Well, I'll build on that because employers are my area. And I think it goes back to, I believe what Walter shared this morning, that they need to remove the words can't, don't, and always from their vocabulary. We have an awesome employer partner in Fargo, North Dakota, a glass manufacturing company that have over 70% of their team leads are foreign born. And we recently featured a story of 3 Afghan clients of ours who 2 of them speak no English. One of them speaks a bit of English, and they hired them as a cohort where, you know, one of them is able to provide interpretation and translation for his colleagues. You know, that's a creative way of approaching it. And that's something that can be duplicated in so many employer settings. And so I think just approaching it with some creativity and some, you know, innovation. The plant manager there described it as like, we have so many problems in manufacturing, like lack of English skills is a pretty easy one to solve. And I like that, you know, that perspective. So I would say, you know, create refugee talent pipelines, connect with me and other resettlement agencies to offer, you know, employment opportunities, workforce development opportunities, you know, and ensure that you are reaching that population.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for your attention at the end of a long day. We really appreciate you coming and listening to us. I think that was a perfect way to end our panel. English is not that big of a problem to solve, so do not let that get in the way of helping people get good jobs.
Yeah.
Thank you.